My parents invited me to their lawyer's office so I could watch them give my younger brother the family house. What they did not know was that the house had never legally belonged to them. My name is Nora Bennett. I was 39 years old when I sat at the far end of a polished walnut table inside Dale & Mercer, an estate planning firm in suburban Connecticut. The room smelled faintly of coffee and furniture polish. My father, Robert, wore the navy suit he saved for weddings and important meetings. My mother, Elaine, had chosen her pearl necklace. Caleb sat beside them with his fiancée, smiling as if the meeting were already a celebration. My father signed the final page of his new will, capped the pen, and looked directly at me. Caleb will receive the house, the investments, and everything that should remain in this family, he said. My mother folded her hands. You chose independence, Nora. You cannot distance yourself from us and still expect to benefit from us. Then their attorney slid a single sheet across the table. It was an acknowledgement stating that I understood their decision and would not challenge the will. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Just sign it. There is no reason to make this uncomfortable. I looked at the paper, then at the people they had invited as witnesses. They had not brought me there because my signature was necessary. They wanted an audience while they erased me. I did not cry. I did not argue. I asked one question. Are you certain you own the house? My father laughed. Working at a bank does not make you a property lawyer. Inside my leather bag was a certified copy of the Rose Bennett Family Residence Trust. Downstairs, the independent trustee was waiting for my message. I placed my phone beneath the table and typed one word. Now. The conference room door opened. My father's smile disappeared. Who invited her? Before I explain who walked in and why that document changed everything, tell me in the comments whether you would have signed the paper just to keep the peace. And subscribe if you have ever been treated like family, only when someone needed something from you. To understand why my parents believed I would sit quietly and obey, you need to understand the family I grew up in. My father owned a local insurance agency and treated appearances like another account he had to manage. Our Christmas cards were coordinated. Our lawn was always cut. At church, my parents were known as generous, dependable people. My mother handled the details. She organized charity lunches, remembered birthdays, and could make our family look loving from across any room. The center of that image was the 4-bedroom colonial where we grew up. My grandmother Rose, my father's mother, had bought it years earlier. After she died, Dad told everyone she had left it to him. I believed him. I was the older child, the practical daughter. Caleb was 5 years younger, charming, athletic, and endlessly forgiven. When Caleb failed, Dad called him ambitious. When I succeeded, Mom called me intense. If Mom had a migraine, I cooked dinner. If Dad needed documents organized, I handled them. I helped Caleb finish school applications, cleaned up after his parties, and rearranged my plans whenever the family needed me. Grandma Rose was the only person who seemed to notice. Once, when I was 19, she found me washing dishes after Caleb's birthday, while everyone else opened his gifts in the living room. She dried a plate beside me and said, "Nora, being useful is not the same as being loved well." I told her she was being dramatic. Years later, I would remember those words differently. From the outside, we looked comfortable, but Dad's agency had started losing clients, and Caleb's big ideas kept swallowing money. Still, my parents protected the picture they had created. Caleb was the future of the Bennett name. I was the reliable daughter kept close enough to help, but never important enough to honor. Because in my family, every favor I gave slowly became a duty. Every boundary became proof that I was selfish. And every mistake Caleb made became another problem they expected me to solve. By the time I was 22, I had learned that saying yes was the fastest way to keep peace in our house. That year, Dad called and said the insurance agency was in trouble. "It is only a temporary cash flow problem," he told me. "You are the sensible one, Nora." I had just started my first full-time job and had saved a little over $9,000. It was supposed to be my emergency fund. I gave him almost all of it. 3 months later, I learned the agency had never been in immediate danger. The money had gone toward Caleb's first restaurant, a sports bar concept that closed before its first anniversary. When I confronted Dad, he did not apologize. Your brother needed a real chance, he said. You have always been good at rebuilding. That became the rule of my adult life. Caleb was allowed to fall. I was expected to provide the floor. At 26, I had an interview for a promotion I had worked toward for 2 years. The night before, Mom called and said she needed someone to drive her to an outpatient procedure. Caleb cannot do it, she said. Did you ask him? He has plans. Do not turn this into a competition. I canceled the interview. Later, I learned Caleb had spent that morning golfing less than 10 minutes from the hospital. During holidays, I cooked while Mom entertained guests. I bought presents for relatives and let my parents put their names on the cards. When Caleb brought friends home, I slept on an air mattress so they could use the bedrooms. At dinner, Dad praised Caleb's courage for starting businesses with other people's money. Then he would look at me and say, Nora has always been afraid to take risks. Privately, he sent me loan documents, tax notices, and insurance letters with messages like, take a quick look at this. A quick look usually meant hours of unpaid work. The worst moment came after my marriage ended. I was 34, exhausted, and ashamed that a life I had tried to save had still fallen apart. I went to my parents' house, hoping my mother would tell me I was not alone. Instead, she poured tea and said, You can be difficult, Nora. Maybe this is a chance to think about why people pull away from you. 3 days later, Dad asked me to co-sign a loan for Caleb. I said no. That single word changed the way my family described me. Mom called me cold. Dad said success had made me arrogant. Caleb posted pieces of our private messages in the family group chat, removing the parts where he had asked for money. By the end of the week, relatives were asking why I had abandoned my parents. Then Dad started asking strange questions about my work. Can banks find old property filings? Can a trust be canceled without everyone knowing? Does a beneficiary have to approve a mortgage? I answered in general terms, but his tone unsettled me. 2 weeks later, a certified envelope arrived at my townhouse. My grandmother's full name was printed across the top. Rose Bennett Family Residence Trust. Beneficiary notification. I read those words 3 times before opening it. My family liked telling people I worked at a bank, as if I sat behind a counter counting deposits. The truth was that I had become a senior fiduciary risk officer. I reviewed trust administration, estate accounts, and questionable property transactions. After my divorce, I earned additional credentials, bought a small townhouse, and stopped sharing my achievements with my family. Any success I mentioned became another reason Caleb deserved help. The letter came from Helen Shaw, an estate attorney I vaguely remembered from Grandma Rose's funeral. When I met Helen, she placed a thick file between us. Your grandmother transferred the colonial into a residence trust before she died, she said. I stared at her. My father said she left it to him. She gave your parents a conditional lifetime right to live there. They never owned it. Then Helen explained that I was the remainder beneficiary. Caleb had received a separate education and business fund. He had exhausted it years ago. The trust itself was not the real emergency. The property taxes were overdue, the insurance had lapsed, and someone had applied to use the house as collateral for Caleb's newest venture. Under the trust, my parents had to receive written notice and time to correct the violations. If they refused, their right to remain in the house could be terminated. I told Helen to verify everything and follow every requirement exactly. I do not want them forced out over a technical mistake, I said. Helen studied me, then turned one final document toward me. It was the collateral application. My father was listed as the sole owner, and beneath a paragraph claiming that the future beneficiary had approved the transaction was my name. I had never seen the form. I had never approved anything. That was when I understood the truth. My parents were not simply planning to exclude me from their future. They were already using my identity to finance Caleb's. The first person I called was my Aunt Vivian. She was my father's older sister, but they had never been close. Dad said Vivian was judgmental. Mom called her difficult. Grandma Rose simply called her honest. Vivian lived 40 minutes away, in a small brick house filled with books, plants, and furniture she had repaired herself. When I arrived, she was standing in her kitchen, wearing an old green apron, rolling dough across a flowered counter. I placed copies of the trust and collateral application beside her coffee cup. She read them slowly. When she reached the page bearing my name, her mouth tightened. Did you authorize this? No. Did Robert tell you the house belonged to the trust? No. He said Grandma left it to him. Vivian removed her glasses and looked at me with an expression I had rarely seen from anyone in my family. Not suspicion, not disappointment. Recognition. Your grandmother created this because she was afraid something like this would happen, she said. Vivian told me that, during Rose's final years, Dad had repeatedly pressured her to sell the Colonial. He wanted the money available for Caleb's businesses and claimed the house was too expensive for an older woman to maintain. Grandma refused. She did not hate your father, Vivian explained. She loved him, but she knew his need to appear successful was stronger than his willingness to admit he was struggling. Rose had watched my family borrow my time, savings, and loyalty while treating Caleb's mistakes like natural disasters no one could blame him for. Vivian reached across the table and covered my hand. She wanted one thing protected from becoming another bailout, and she trusted you to protect it. I felt grateful. I also felt angry. Then why didn't anyone tell me? I asked. Why didn't she defend me when she was alive? Vivian's eyes filled, but she did not look away. She should have. I should have too. That answer mattered, because it did not excuse anything. For once, someone in my family admitted that seeing the truth was not the same as speaking it. Vivian did not tell me to punish my parents. She said, the goal is not to make them homeless. The goal is to stop them from spending someone else's future to protect Caleb from his own choices. Helen sent the formal cure notice the following morning. My parents had 60 days to pay the overdue property taxes, restore the insurance, withdraw the collateral application, and provide a complete accounting of the trust property. If they did those things, their right to live in the house would remain intact. I even authorized Helen to offer them a structured payment plan. Everything could have been handled quietly. Dad responded by calling the trust notice a clerical mistake. He accused the unnamed remainder beneficiary of greed and wrote that the house had belonged to him in every meaningful sense for years. Then Mom called me. Her voice was warm enough to make me uneasy. Nora, sweetheart, we are having an important family estate meeting next month. We want you there. She spoke as if we had not spent weeks avoiding the subject. I asked, does this have anything to do with Grandma Rose's trust? There was a pause. This is about family, she said. Try not to turn it into business. Over the next several weeks, my parents started preparing the rest of the family before they prepared the truth. Mom told relatives I was pressuring them about the house because I resented Caleb. Dad said my work had made me obsessed with legal control. Caleb announced that he was opening an upscale event venue and mentioned, more than once, that the family home would secure the financing. He spoke with complete confidence. That told me Dad had promised him the property without explaining that he did not own it. Meanwhile, the cure deadline moved closer. Helen sent 2 documented reminders. Dad refused delivery of one. He answered the second by claiming the trust had been effectively canceled years earlier. No cancellation document existed. Then Helen confirmed that my parents had stopped paying the property taxes because they expected Caleb's loan to cover their debts. That changed everything. This was no longer confusion about an old estate plan. They were knowingly treating trust property as their own, while using my supposed approval to make the deal possible. I wanted to post every document in the family group chat. Instead, I built a file, certified copies of the trust, the recorded deed, tax notices, insurance records, the rejected collateral application, the form carrying my name. I arranged everything by date because facts become harder to distort when they are placed in order. Vivian agreed to come if I needed a family witness. Helen planned to wait nearby because the 60-day cure period would expire on the same afternoon as the estate meeting. Part of me still hoped my parents might tell the truth before it came to that. 3 days before the appointment, I called Mom again. What exactly is this meeting for? She sighed, as if I were exhausting her. This is about deciding who deserves to be family. When I arrived at Dale and Mercer, Caleb's fiancée was already seated beside him. On her lap was a cream-colored folder stamped with gold letters. Future ownership plans. That was when I understood the meeting had never been about reconciliation. My parents intended to give Caleb the house in front of witnesses, make me sign away my objections, and call my humiliation a family decision. Marcus Dale, my parents' attorney, waited until everyone was seated before opening the thick blue folder in front of him. He was a careful-looking man in his early 50s, with silver at his temples and reading glasses folded beside his legal pad. Nothing about him suggested cruelty. That almost made the room worse. My parents had wrapped something deeply personal inside a perfectly respectable appointment. "My clients have completed updated estate documents," Marcus said. "They ask that the immediate family be present so their intentions are clear." Dad adjusted his suit jacket. Mom sat upright beside him, one hand resting over the other, as if she were posing for a photograph. Then Dad began. He said Caleb had remained loyal to the family. He said Caleb intended to raise children in the Bennett home and preserve everything previous generations had built. He described my brother as dependable. That word nearly made me laugh. Caleb had burned through Grandma's business fund, closed one restaurant, abandoned another project before it opened, and was now depending on a house he did not own to finance his next idea. But Dad kept speaking. "Nora has made different choices," he said. "She values independence over family connection. We respect that." Mom nodded slowly. "So we have decided. Caleb will inherit the house, the investments, and the remaining family assets." Caleb's fiancée smiled at him. The gold lettering on the folder in her lap caught the light. Future ownership plans. Marcus looked down at his papers before continuing. "Nora will receive a collection of personal photographs and keepsakes belonging to Mrs. Rose Bennett. My grandmother's photographs. That was my inheritance. Not because the photographs were all my parents had to give me, but because they believed sentimental scraps were the perfect way to remind me that I had never mattered in practical terms." Mom turned toward me. "You were always closer to Grandma emotionally," she said. "This feels appropriate." There was something almost graceful about the way she said it. That was one of her talents. She could make rejection sound thoughtful. Then she pushed the acknowledgement form toward me. "This simply confirms that you understand our wishes and will not cause trouble later." Caleb crossed one ankle over his knee. "Honestly, Nora, you should be relieved they invited you. Most people would have handled this privately." One of the witnesses looked down at the table. The other adjusted his chair and stared toward the window. Even Caleb's fiancée stopped smiling. I looked at the paper in front of me. For years, I had responded to cruelty by explaining myself. I would list everything I had done, remind them of every sacrifice, and hope the right combination of facts would finally make them treat me fairly. That morning, I understood something simple. People who benefit from misunderstanding you rarely want clarification. I placed both hands on the table. "Marcus," I said, "can a will transfer property that the person signing it does not legally own?" Dad made an irritated sound. "There she goes." Marcus looked at me carefully. "No, a will can generally transfer only assets that belong to the estate." Dad leaned forward. "The house belongs to me." "Are you certain?" I asked. His face hardened. "My name has been associated with that property for decades. Your little bank position does not make you an authority on my home." I reached into my bag and removed the certified copy of the recorded trust deed. I placed it in the center of the table. No dramatic gesture, no speech, just paper against polished wood. Marcus pulled the document toward him and read the first page. His expression changed slowly. First concentration, then confusion, then concern. He looked at Dad. "Mr. Bennett, did you disclose the Rose Bennett Family Residence Trust when we prepared these wills?" Dad waved one hand. "That is an old arrangement. It has no practical effect." Marcus did not answer immediately. He turned another page. "This deed appears to transfer title to the trust." Mom looked at me. "What have you done?" "I did not create it," I said. "Grandma did." Dad's voice rose. "My mother left me that house. She gave you the right to live there under certain conditions." Caleb sat forward. "What conditions?" I looked at him for the first time. The property taxes had to remain current. The insurance had to remain active. The house could not be pledged as collateral without the trustees' approval. The room became very still. Dad's jaw tightened. This is not the place for this discussion. You chose the place, I said quietly. You invited the witnesses. Marcus removed his glasses. Has there been an alleged trust violation? There has been formal notice, I said. The 60-day cure period expired this morning. Mom's hand moved to her necklace. Dad looked toward Marcus. She is trying to frighten us. I opened my phone beneath the edge of the table and sent the message Helen had been waiting for. Now, the overdue taxes were not paid, I continued. The insurance was not restored, and the collateral application was never withdrawn. Caleb's face lost its color. What collateral application? Dad turned sharply toward him. Do not say anything. That was the moment the conference room door opened. Helen Shaw walked in carrying a black document case. Behind her stood Aunt Vivian, holding a sealed cream envelope. Dad stared at them. Who invited her? I did, I said. Helen introduced herself as the independent trustee and asked Marcus whether they could confirm the documents privately before proceeding. Marcus agreed immediately. Helen placed the trust agreement, county filing, tax records, insurance notices, and collateral application in front of him, one by one, in order. Marcus read in silence. Then Helen pointed to the paragraph stating that I had approved the proposed financing. Ms. Bennett, she said, looking at me formally, did you sign, review, or authorize this representation? No. Mom shook her head. This is a misunderstanding. It is written on a loan application, I said. That makes it more than a misunderstanding. Marcus raised one hand. I strongly advise everyone to stop speaking until I have reviewed the entire file. Dad ignored him. This woman and my daughter are conspiring to take my house. Helen did not react. The trust owns the residence, she said. You and your wife were granted conditional occupancy. You were notified of the violations and given the full contractual period to correct them. Mom looked at Vivian. Rose would never have chosen Nora over Caleb. Vivian held up the sealed envelope. She did not choose one grandchild over another, she said. She protected the house from becoming another rescue fund. Caleb's fiancée closed the folder on her lap. Marcus turned to Caleb. Have you already entered financial agreements based on the assumption that this property would support your business financing? Caleb looked at Dad. Dad looked away. No one needed him to answer. His silence told us that money had already been promised, contracts had already been signed, and my parents had brought me into that room, believing humiliation would make me surrender before I discovered how far their plan had gone. I looked at Helen. Present everything, I said. For the first time in my life, I was not asking my family to understand me. I was ready to let the documents speak for me. Helen opened the original trust agreement and turned it so everyone could see the embossed seal. The Rose Bennett Family Residence Trust owns the property at 14 Hawthorne Lane, she said. Robert and Elaine Bennett do not. Dad laughed bitterly. We have lived there for 12 years. You were granted conditional occupancy, Helen replied. That is not ownership. Marcus read the relevant paragraph. The room was so quiet I heard the clasp click as Caleb's fiancée closed her folder. Helen explained that the trust required current taxes, active insurance, and written trustee approval before the house could support outside financing. My parents had violated all 3 conditions. Dad looked at Marcus. Tell her this is ridiculous. Marcus kept his eyes on the page. I cannot! Mom leaned toward him. But our wills say the house goes to Caleb. A will cannot transfer property you do not own, Marcus said. That sentence ended the performance. Helen removed another document. The violations were not corrected during the 60-day cure period. The trust is terminating your occupancy rights. You have 90 days to move, and you may seek legal review. Mom stared at her. You are throwing us onto the street? No. You were warned, given time to correct the violations, and offered a structured solution. There was no instant eviction, just a consequence moving through the proper process. Caleb pushed his chair back. What happens to my loan? If this house was the collateral, Marcus said. There is no valid collateral. Caleb went pale. I already signed the lease. His fiancée turned toward him. You said the financing was certain. It was supposed to be. How much did you spend? He looked down. More than I could afford to lose. Dad pointed at me. You knew this would happen. I knew what you were attempting. That is not the same thing. He stood so quickly his chair struck the wall. You can stop it. Tell Helen to waive the violations and give the family back its home. I looked at the man who had invited witnesses to watch him erase me. It was never yours to give away. Vivian placed Grandma Rose's sealed letter on the table. She asked me to keep this until the trust was challenged or used against Nora, she said. Mom shook her head. Rose was confused near the end. Vivian opened the envelope. Grandma wrote that Caleb's mistakes repeatedly became debts everyone else was expected to absorb, while my sacrifices were treated as an unlimited family resource. The trust was not created to reward me or punish him. It existed to keep the house from becoming another bailout. Hearing those words did not feel like victory. It felt like finally being seen by someone who was no longer alive. She always favored Nora, Mom whispered. No, Vivian said. She recognized what the rest of us allowed. Dad accused me of manipulating Grandma. I did not know this trust existed until 2 months ago, I said. Then I opened my evidence file. In one printed group chat message, Dad told Caleb they would deal with Nora after the financing cleared. In another, Caleb wrote, "She will sign if you make it about loyalty." Dad had answered, "She always does." I added the email attaching the collateral application and asking whether my supposed approval would satisfy the lender. My name appeared beneath it, not my signature, just my name, used like permission. Marcus read the pages. "You did not disclose this when you retained me," he told my parents. Dad's confidence cracked. "It was a private family arrangement. You asked me to prepare legal documents using an inaccurate description of your assets. I cannot defend that." He turned to Caleb. "Any lease or deposit committed before confirmed financing remains your responsibility." Caleb's fiancée stood and placed the future ownership plans folder on the table. "You told me the house was already yours," she said. "It was going to be." "That is not what you told me." She picked up her purse and walked out. Dad looked at me. "You cannot destroy this family over a piece of paper." I was done trying to make him understand. "You were free to leave me nothing," I said. "You were not free to give away what you never owned or use my name to do it." No one spoke. I refused to sign the waiver and instructed Helen to administer the trust exactly as written. I asked for no accelerated removal or extra punishment. I simply stopped rescuing them from their decisions. The consequences unfolded over 3 months. My parents hired a trust litigator. After reviewing the deed, notices, and application, he advised them that negotiating a move would cost less than challenging a valid trust. The title company rejected Caleb's financing. His venue lease collapsed, and he lost his deposit. His fiancée postponed the wedding and moved out after learning about his hidden debts. Relatives who had accused me of attacking my parents saw Helen's factual timeline. I posted it once in the family group chat, without insults, and left. Mom sold jewelry. Dad liquidated a small investment account. They rented a condominium across town. When Vivian and I visited the Colonial during the move, boxes covered the hallway. Grandma's photographs sat in a carton near the stairs. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I mourned the family we had pretended to be. That evening, Caleb was waiting outside my townhouse with the photographs in his arms. "Nora," he said, "you have to fix this before Mom and Dad lose anything else." Even after everything, he had come to ask me to save them. Again. I did not invite Caleb inside. He stood beneath the porch light holding Grandma Rose's photographs, as if returning them should earn him something. "I am sorry about how the meeting happened," he said, "but Mom and Dad are terrified. You could ask Helen to let them stay. That is not my decision to reverse." He shifted the box against his chest. "You are the beneficiary. Everyone knows you have influence." There it was. Not an apology. A request. Caleb wanted me to restore our parents' occupancy, replace the deposit he had lost, and keep the truth quiet so his fiancée might reconsider the wedding. "They are too old to start over," he said. I looked at my younger brother and thought about every time I had started over alone. After giving Dad my savings, after losing the promotion, after my divorce, after discovering that my family had used my name without my consent. "They have a condominium," I said. "They have income, legal advice, and 90 days to move." Starting over is uncomfortable. It is not the same as being abandoned. He frowned. So you are just going to let this happen? No, Caleb. I am going to stop preventing consequences from happening. I gave him contact information for a financial counselor and a moving service. I did not give him money. A week later, Mom began leaving tearful messages. She claimed she had never understood what Dad had written on the financing documents. Dad sent me a letter calling me an ungrateful daughter. 4 days after that, he sent another letter asking to meet privately without attorneys. I answered once through Helen. All property matters would remain in writing. Personal contact would pause for 6 months. Vivian reminded me that no contact was not revenge. It is a locked door, she said, not a weapon. Then Caleb sent one final message. He admitted he had known the house was held in a trust. Dad had convinced him that enough pressure would make Helen or me ignore the restrictions. That confession ended the last excuse I had been making for him. I blocked the family group chat, changed my emergency contacts, and started therapy. I had spent years confusing guilt with responsibility. Learning the difference felt less like freedom at first, and more like withdrawal. After my parents moved, Helen asked what I wanted to do with the colonial. For once, the answer was mine. I did not move into the house. I did not sell it for a dramatic profit or turn it into a monument to winning. The trust repaired the roof, restored the insurance, and partnered with a local nonprofit that provided transitional housing for women rebuilding after divorce and financial abuse. We preserved one upstairs room as a family archive. Grandma's photographs lined the shelves beside her recipes, letters, and old gardening notebooks. 6 months later, my parents sent a written apology. They admitted hiding the trust and allowing my name to appear on the financing application. They still described years of favoritism as misunderstandings. I did not pretend that one letter repaired everything. I agreed to meet them once in a public cafe with Vivian nearby. Mom looked smaller than I remembered. Dad looked older. I told them any future relationship would move slowly. No requests for money. No attacks on my character, no pressure involving Caleb, and no expectation that I would rescue them from decisions they made without me. They accepted the rules because, for the first time, they understood I was willing to leave. Caleb eventually took a salaried job. His fiancée never returned. For the first time in his life, he had to live with a loss our parents could not transfer to me. On Grandma Rose's birthday, I stood in the restored kitchen surrounded by Vivian, Helen, close friends, and several women the housing program had helped. The evening light came through the same window where Grandma once warned me not to confuse being needed with being valued. Being written out of my parents' will had felt like proof that I did not belong, but their will was never the document that defined my future. The trust did not give me revenge. It gave me the chance to stop a pattern. I did not take my parents home. I stopped them from taking what was never theirs, including the rest of my life. If you have ever been loved only for what you could provide, share your story in the comments. Subscribe for more stories about truth, boundaries, and starting over. Sometimes the real inheritance is not property. It is finally knowing when to walk away.